I never should have opened the door for the man who wasn't there. It sounds like the start of a bad joke, I know, but it's the truth that now chills me to the bone. My name is Anika, and until last month, I was a practical person, a graphic designer who believed in Wi-Fi passwords, ergonomic chairs, and the comforting, logical hum of a city at night. My life was a series of deadlines and deliverables, completely unprepared for the silence of my grandmother's old cabin. She'd left it to me in her will, a quaint, slightly dilapidated wooden structure nestled deep in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. The plan was simple: 2 weeks of solitude to finally work on my portfolio, surrounded by nothing but pine trees and peace. The first detail I should have noticed was the silence. It wasn't a peaceful quiet, but a dense, heavy absence, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The second was the state of the cabin's single, small fireplace. The ashes inside were cold and scattered, yet they gave off a faint, metallic smell, like old blood and wet earth. The third was the clock, a beautiful old grandfather clock that stood sentinel in the main room, its brass pendulum still. It was frozen at 3:07 a.m. The first 2 days were blissfully normal. I set up my laptop on the rough-hewn wooden table, brewed coffee on the gas stove, and enjoyed the view of the sun-dappled trees. The silence began to feel less oppressive, more like a companion. That changed on the third night. I was woken by a sound of soft, rhythmic scraping coming from the living room. Scrape, drag, scrape, drag. My heart hammered against my ribs. I lay frozen, straining my ears, trying to logic my way through it. A branch against a window? An animal under the floorboards? The sound was too deliberate, too methodical. It lasted for exactly 3 minutes, then stopped as abruptly as it began. The next morning, I investigated. Nothing was out of place, except when I looked at the grandfather clock, I saw that the pendulum had moved. It was now frozen at 3:10 a.m. The following nights were a study in escalating dread. The scraping returned, sometimes closer, sometimes farther away, but always that same terrible rhythm. Then came the whispers. They were so faint I first mistook them for the wind soughing through the pines. But the wind doesn't form words. It doesn't whisper your name with a voice that sounds like grinding stones and dry leaves. "Anika," it would sigh from just beyond the darkened window. "Let us in." I stopped sleeping. I started leaving every light on, the cabin blazing like a lonely beacon in the vast, dark woods. The false safety came a week in. After a particularly terrifying night where the whispers seemed to come from inside the walls, ID had enough. I packed my bags, my hands shaking so badly I could barely zip the suitcase. I was done. The portfolio could wait, my sanity could not. I marched to my car, fumbling for my keys. The engine didn't even try to turn over. Not a click, not a groan. Just dead, absolute silence. The battery was completely drained, though I had driven it just the day before. My phone had no service. I was trapped. This is the part where I have to ask you, the person watching this, a question. Have you ever been truly, utterly alone? Not just by yourself, but isolated in a way that makes you feel like the last person on earth? A silence so deep it feels like it's watching you? Comment below what your biggest fear is when you're alone in the dark. Is it a sound, a shape, or is it just the silence itself? Defeated, I trudged back into the cabin, the weight of the forest pressing in on me. That's when I noticed the clock again. 3:14 a.m. The times were changing. They were counting down. A cold, sharp terror, clearer than any ID felt before, pierced through the haze of my fatigue. This wasn't random hauntings. This was an appointment, and it was for 3:17 a.m. I had 1 night left. I spent my final day in a frantic, futile attempt to prepare. I'd boarded up the windows with spare planks of wood I found in a shed. I dragged a heavy kitchen table in front of the door. I found my grandmother's old silver locket and clutched it like a talisman. As night fell, I sat on the floor in the center of the room, my back to the cold fireplace, a heavy iron poker in my lap. The cabin was dark, save for the single beam of my flashlight. I watched the hands of my watch tick slowly, inexorably, toward 3:17. The first sound was a knock. Not on the door, but on the roof. Tap, tap, tap. Then another on the window to my left. Then another on the wall behind me. It was a staccato rhythm of something moving around the cabin, testing its boundaries. The whispers started again, but this time they weren't fleeting. They were chanting, a low, guttural string of words I couldn't understand. The air grew cold, so cold I could see my breath pluming in the flashlight beam. The knocking became pounding, shaking the very foundations of the cabin. The wooden planks on the windows began to splinter. The table barricading the doors screeched as something immense pushed against it. I squeezed my eyes shut, praying for it to end, and then everything stopped. The pounding ceased. The whispers faded. The cold began to recede. I let out a shuddering breath, a hysterical laugh bubbling in my throat. It was over. I had survived. I opened my eyes. I was not alone. In the corner of the room where the shadows were deepest, a figure stood. It was tall and impossibly thin, a man-shaped void that absorbed the light. It had no face, no features, just a profound, swirling darkness. And it was holding something. My grandmother's silver locket, the one I had been clutching in my hand just moments before. It tilted its head, and a silence more absolute than any I have ever known poured from it. A silence that wasn't an absence of sound, but a presence. It was the silence of the grave, of forgotten places, of the void between stars. It took a step toward me, and I felt my mind beginning to unravel at the edges, threatening to come apart completely. I don't know how I found the strength to move. I scrambled backward, my shoulder hitting the grandfather clock. With a groan of aged wood and a shudder of grinding gears, the clock fell. It hit the floor with a deafening crash, the glass face shattering, the intricate brass workings spilling out like metallic entrails. In that moment of chaos, the thing in the corner flickered. It seemed to waver, like a disturbed reflection in water, and in that split second, I saw past it. I saw through the corner of the room, into another placely desolate, gray plain under a sickly yellow sky. The sight lasted only a heartbeat before the thing solidified again, its faceless gaze fixed once more on me. But it was enough. It wasn't trying to get in. It was trying to get out, and I had just broken its anchor. With a sound like 1,000 sighs, the figure dissolved, collapsing inward into a pinpoint of nothingness before vanishing. The locket clattered to the floor. The cabin was silent, truly silent for the first time. The next morning, my car started on the first try. I drove away, and I never looked back. I sold the cabin for a pittance to a property developer who didn't believe in ghosts. I try to tell myself it's over, that I broke the cycle. But sometimes, in the dead of night, when the city is unusually quiet, it'll wake up to a faint metallic smell in the air, and it'll lie there, perfectly still, waiting. I'm not waiting for a sound. I'm waiting for the silence to start speaking again. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If you felt that chill, that sense of dread, then you understand why I had to share this. If you want to hear more tales from the edge of reality, please hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you don't miss the next one. And remember, the next time you find yourself in a deep silence, pay attention to what it leaves behind.